Welcome to the kitchen today. Today we will be making some cinnamon raisin bread, childhood classic. For today's recipe, we need 200 grams of whole milk, 550 grams of bread flour, we need 7 grams or 1 packet of instant dry yeast, we need 5 grams of salt, we need 60 grams of sugar, we need 130 grams of butter, or about 9 tablespoons, 3 eggs. For the topping, you'll need a cup of raisins, 100 grams of brown sugar, 10 grams of cinnamon, and about 2 grams of nutmeg, and the rest of a stick of butter. We'll start with 200 grams of milk, and then to that we'll be adding our 7 grams of instant yeast, our 60 grams of sugar, and you're going to give that a nice stir, and then you'll let it sit for 10 minutes, and in that 10 minutes you'll let the yeast bloom. So that's waking up the dry yeast, making sure that it's nice and active and that it's actually alive. Sometimes your yeast will be dead and you don't want to put dead yeast into your bread, and then after 3 hours of it not rising, realizing, oh, it's dead yeast. Now that your yeast has bloomed, we are going to start with adding some flour. This is bread flour. Bread flour gives you more protein. It has a higher protein, and so helps structure the gluten more and gives your bread more strength. So we're just going to put our 550 grams into the bowl. And now we're going to add our 5 grams of salt.
I'll just stay wide for this.
Yeah. It shouldn't take too long. Alright, with that all there, we can get rid of our scale. Give it a nice stir, get that salt incorporated, and then we dump in our yeasty, milky, sugary mixture. So now we want to stir this in to get all the flour nice and wet. So do as much as you can with your spoon, and then get in there with your hand a little bit, and you just want to get it to a nice shaggy dough type consistency. This is just getting the flour nice and wet. Alright, now we're going to let it sit for 10 minutes with a nice towel over the top. So tuck it in and we'll be back in 10 minutes. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to be adding our butter and our eggs. So you want your butter to be warm and liquid but not hot. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a belly button in the middle of our dough. So we're going to kind of press this out and make a nice little well to dump the butter in. Crack our eggs into it too. And then we get in there with our hands and start to knead. It's going to be real sticky at first, that's okay. You're just going to let the flour soak it up and the gluten start to develop. When kneading, it takes time, so if you have a favorite podcast or a show that you're watching, just put it on and keep kneading. It can take 5 to 7 minutes, so just keep at it and eventually you'll get that gluten to start to develop. You'll get a nice dough. Alright, and after your 5 to 7 minutes, you should start getting to a dough that's looking like this. To check when it's done, what you can do is you can pull off a chunk, and then if it gets nice and thin enough that you can see light through it without tearing, that's when you know it's done. So then what we're gonna do is we're gonna tuck itself underneath and set it into our bowl. Take our plastic wrap, and we're gonna wanna stretch it out give it a nice covering. And then at this point, you want to give your bread some nice character. Maybe a name, you know, Bob or something. And we've got Bob, and we'll take Bob, and you want to take your dough and you want to put him somewhere nice and warm where he can rise, and then we'll just let him do his thing. And we want him to get doubled in size, so that'll take about an hour to an hour and a half. And while we wait for Bob to get nice and big and strong, have a donut. Now that your dough has risen 1 to 1.5, you're gonna pull off your plastic wrap, and then you're gonna punch the life out of your dough, really degas it. And then we're going to get a nice work surface, nice clean work surface. We're gonna throw just a little bit of flour on there, just so our dough doesn't stick. And now what you're gonna wanna do is we're gonna roll it out to a nice long rectangle. Try and get it as rectangular as possible. It's gonna try and pull itself more into a ovular shape, but that's okay. Once you get that as your rectangle, we're now gonna add the cinnamon sugar and the raisins. So we need to weigh out our sugar. We're doing about 100 grams of your brown sugar, and then 10 grams of your cinnamon, and then a gram or 2 of nutmeg. Just adds a little bit of depth to the flavor profile. And if you have clumps in your, use a fork, mix that around, get it nice and good and combined. And then I went ahead and pre-melted some butter. We're gonna use to stick this down. So this is the other 7 tablespoons of butter, about 100 grams. We're just gonna get nice and spread out here. This is the glue that's gonna hold it all together, so make sure you get all the way to the edges. And sprinkle that cinnamon sugar goodness all over. Then we're gonna take our raisins and spread those out nice and evenly. If they clump up, just kind of spread them out a little bit. So you want a nice layer so you get that juicy raisin in each bite. All right, so now that you have a nice layer of all of your innards, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start the roll. And so you're gonna want to pull and then tuck, pull and tuck, so it's nice and tight. You want it to be nice and tight the whole way down until you have a nice long log all the way across. And at this point, we're gonna need to grab our bread pan and our oil so that we can get this nice and ready. And you want to give generous coating, because this is going to be sugar and goodness, and that has a tendency of sticking a whole lot. So get that ready, and then we're going to rotate it so that we can cut it in half. And so you're just gonna get it nice and divide it out. And then we're gonna do what's called babkaing. And so we're gonna get real fancy with it, and we're just gonna twist the 2 layers. It's gonna try and kind of undo itself, but you just kind of stack the layers on top of each other. And this will give a funky twist and helps keep the bread more intact and give it a little bit more diversity throughout the bread. And then you're gonna kind of just roll it into the bread tin like so. Tuck those ends in, get it nice and in there. And then we're gonna take our plastic wrap again, and then we do what's called proofing. This is the second rise. Give it that final aeration, and this one you let go for 45 minutes to an hour, and then we can start the baking. Now it's time for baking. Baking is gonna happen in two separate sections. We're gonna bake at 400 for 30 minutes, and this is the higher temperature. It creates a better oven spring, and you get some good browning. And then we're gonna cover it so not to get too much browning and burn it. So we're gonna foil the top of it into a little tent, and then we're gonna bake it for another 15 to 20 minutes at 350 degrees. We're gonna take our, where's my scoop? My scoop isn't in there. What did I do with my scoop? I left it in the big thing. And grab some plastic wrap, and we're gonna not have it fall out like that.